cloud. It's one of the latest buzzwords. And in fact, we've actually got another exhibition stand over the road at another conference on cloud computing run by Oven Butler Group today. So it is very much in the focus at the moment. A couple of people have also mentioned, I've heard mention about it was on the Gadget Show recently as well. So what I'm going to talk through briefly is looking at this with a risk management view. Obviously, we are capacity managers, we deal with capacity management, and part of that is, in my view, is risk management. Capacity management is just a form of risk management. That's what we're doing for a business. So what I'm looking at here is a risk management approach to having a look at cloud computing. Obviously, as I say, we are short on time here to do this, so I'm not going to go into too much detail at the start. But obviously over the last 50 years there's been a lot of change in computing. There's been paradigms that have changed over that period from the mainframe model back in the 50s. My mum used to sort punch cards when she was pregnant with me, so she said maybe it was inevitable I ended up in computing. So back in that period, mainframes, big hefty mainframes that could only be afforded by large businesses, doing lots of very data intensive computational work. And we've moved through the model through the era of the personal computer in the 80s, spawned a huge rise in distributed computing with all the issues that that's brought, such as server sprawl, and just a new server for every application, and massive data centres full of servers which quite frequently aren't even running any real applications on them anymore, and are just sitting there using power. And now we've got more mature as an industry, and bear in mind IT really is only about 50 odd years old. So we've got more mature as an industry, and we're now starting to look at, well, maybe we should be a bit clever about the way we do these things. So one of the things that's happening now is obviously we're now looking at consolidation, and we're going back onto virtualised platforms, such as all the mainframe guys have been saying that we should have been using for the last 20 odd years. And I bow to all my former colleagues, who I can see several in the room, who were telling me those things for a long time. So just a quick run through on this. So centralised computing paradigm is to realistically mid-80s, large centralised mainframes with people connecting from dumb terminals, via some form of network or controllers, whatever. Into a large centralised platform. Obviously, in the 80s, we started with the personal computer, the advent of the personal computer in 1981. We moved more to a distributed computing model, and that meant that we ended up with lots of large data centres with servers in them. Then we started to introduce forms of virtualisation. Obviously, VPN was one of the early forms of virtualisation, so people using large shared pipes to actually have a dedicated virtual private network across them with security at both ends. And then more recently we've moved towards using web services, and obviously if you've heard of the term web services or SOA or mashups, any of these sorts of terms that have been used in the last few years, these are about don't do it all yourself. Somebody else already has a web service out there for it. Why go and build, for instance, a postcode lookup if you're building a system? Why build your own postcode lookup? There are dozens of postcode lookup services out there that you can use as a web service. All you need to do is to connect to that registry and use that service. So that's obviously changed a lot over the years. But what we're moving to now is what's called cloud, and you have a cloud provider that provides a lot of these services in-house and sells them to you. So you don't have to worry about that. You don't need a data center. It's all done for you in theory. And you hear lots of terms. Lots of people talk about how cheap this is going to a cloud model and so on. So this is more where we are today. So is cloud just the next step in virtualization? Obviously we've introduced virtualization reintroduced virtualization for those mainframe people over the last few years. Obviously with computing we use things like VMware now and other forms of virtualization. On networks we've been using VPNs for some time. Storage, for instance, we use storage area networks, and desktops, things like Citrix. So you can have a model like this. So you have your desktop operating system here. with virtualized environments. This is one particular form of desktop virtualization. So you have your applications in their own individual sandboxes, so if they crash, they can't actually affect anything else, and they can work with their own versions of DLLs. Connected across a VPN to some server somewhere, which is actually one piece of hardware running maybe several blades on different blades, different virtual machines, so you can connect to applications there. Over a large chunk of fibre channel, there'll be individual paths to a virtual disk on a storage area network somewhere. So as you see, we've virtualised most of it now. There's some form of virtualisation going on across this stack now. So typical cloud architecture, you have whatever the end user services are you want to use, so for instance web servers, application servers, database and so on. But you also need, the cloud provider needs some form of ancillary management aspects as well. And so typically what you get are authentication services, so that when you log on that they know it's you, or whoever you've allowed access to that particular service. Billing servers, because that's the most important thing. There's no point in them supplying this if they can't bill you for it. Provisioning servers, so that's to automatically provision images of these for you, so these tend to be virtual images on larger boxes. And obviously some form of systems management to manage this for you. Now it's not fully, there's not full autonomy here yet, or with some of the providers they may claim there is, but there doesn't appear to be full autonomy there from the capacity on demand type aspect that we've been led to believe is the strength of cloud, in that when it hits a threshold it will automatically spin up another server and so on. I don't think that autonomy exists today. I'm more than welcome to be corrected on that, but certainly with some of the providers that we've talked to and we've looked at, they don't appear to be able to do that. It still appears to be very much manual process. As an example, we've used a similar service, a cloud service recently. One of our customers needed to share some documents with us, and rather than FTP them over to our FTP server, we set up a Microsoft SharePoint Online server. It took about 15 minutes to fill in the paperwork. It took about another 10 minutes for the image to spin up. It took about another 10 minutes for us to configure it, for the users to use it. So the only thing we know about that is it was running in the data centre in Dublin. That's all we know about that. We don't know anything about what box it's running on, what it looks like, anything. It's just completely virtualised. But what we were able to do was set up a unique URL for the customer to be able to access it when they want. They just type in the URL and they were actually redirected to this SharePoint image in a data centre in Dublin that we had access to as well. And you buy them in 5 user chunks. We were able to set up another couple of customers. So it's quite easy to do. Separate URLs going to the same place, but different authentication rights and separate services. And it was very easy to use, very quick to set up. And this is obviously one of the aspects once you have this autonomy in place. Other important aspects obviously are you need some form of contract, you need some form of SLA, and important from the cloud provider's perspective is billing. So some of the service providers out there, you'll probably notice that a few of these are people who aren't necessarily outsourcers. These aren't people like CSC or Capital or people like that who have big IT estates, but they want to leverage and use that they're already outsourcing to people. These are people, Amazon, Google, Microsoft, who have just built large IT estates for their own business purposes and then realised, hey, hang on, these are running at 10, 20, 30% utilisation. Why don't we resell this capacity? And so, Amazon, as I say, I was across the road earlier, listened to a keynote speech from an Ovum analyst, and Amazon are making at the moment and are projecting 50% profit margins on their online services, and they make, I don't know, 5% on selling books and things. So you can see that that's a lot more useful to them as a business. Obviously Google, Sun have been doing this for a while as well, Microsoft, Rackspace, who were a traditional hosting type company anyway. And of course Salesforce. Salesforce.com was the first ASP model, as it used to be called, back in the late 90s, early 2000s, before ASP went out of fashion because nobody had big enough bandwidth to connect. They were the first online provider of a CRM system. So you actually had an online CRM system, so you didn't host it yourself, they hosted it for you, all you did was upload the data and you had a web front end. And now they've built the whole architecture on using that investment in infrastructure they've got. So typical cloud services available, web servers, virtually whatever type of web server you want is available. Application servers, queue servers, they have queuing services as well, database servers and storage services. All of these guys, we talked about, provide these in different aspects. Obviously Microsoft tend to be Microsoft centric, as you can imagine, but you go to Amazon or Google and you can virtually have whatever flavour you want. So now moving on, so that's a quick 5-minute race through what cloud is at the moment. So just now to talk about looking at this with a risk management hat on, as it were. So here's a useful definition of risk management I always use from the Institute of Risk Management. The proactive identification, analysis and control of those risks which can threaten the assets or the earning capacity of an enterprise. Now, as capacity and performance people, this is exactly what we do on a daily basis. We're looking at a subset of risks. We're not looking at the whole set of risks that people in the business or IT are, but we're looking at a subset of risks, such as, so what if we buy a new company tomorrow and get 20% of extra demand on our servers? Or what if we sell part of it? Or what's the seasonal demand for our peak in January going to do to us? Those are all risks that we're providing mitigation for. Yeah? So we are risk managers, but it's just we're concentrating on one small subset. So this is a graph that ITIL use for risk management. ITIL version 3 used for risk management. I'm sure you've all seen this. If any of you have done risk management courses, the likelihood of something happening and the impact of something happening, and those are the two things you look at. And obviously you compare those. So if this event here, so C, whatever C may be, it's 50% likely to happen, but there's very little impact if it does happen. So from a capacity point of view, or just a general risk management point of view, you wouldn't worry too much about that and you may proceed. Obviously the ones in the middle here, then you tend to be a bit more cautious about, and the ones up here, which are very high likelihood and very high impact, you just don't do. And this is called your risk tolerance limit here. As an organisation, this is what your risk tolerance limits are. Now, obviously, some of the people in the room belong to organisations that were selling virtually junk bonds in mortgages and things, but we won't go there. That risk tolerance limit may have been a little bit lower.